Please welcome to the stage Rayland Rabaka, University of Colorado Boulder founder and director of the Center for African and African American Studies.
Warm greetings and good morning. How y'all doing? I think y'all can do better than that. How y'all doing? All right. I am Rayland Rabaka, founder, director, Center for African and African American Studies, and we want to begin, as we do here at the University of Colorado Boulder, with our land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples to our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, faculty, and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge, and consulting, engaging, working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. And so I'd like to begin by sharing a little bit with you about the brand new center, the Center for African and African American Studies. It was established last year in July, so July 2001. The brand new center has three major program areas. First and foremost, obviously, student services. Some of y'all probably can just look around and see that this can be a very alienating space for African and African American students. So the levels of cultural alienation and isolation that the students, the staff, the faculty have experienced here is truly something that needs to be addressed. So one of the major program areas of the center, student services. Second, we have a research program in our brand new center. And lastly, we have an arts program. And so that's going to be visual and performing arts program. And one of the things that we do in the center is we teach our students their interrelatedness. So this whole concept of Ubuntu, that we all share humanity, that I cannot really fully achieve my humanity if I don't help you do the same. And one of the ways we do that is by focusing on climate justice, right? Particularly, we're looking at environmental racism. So what we do, we teach our community in the Center for African and African American Studies an ever-expanding sense of self through our sense of oneness with others in the world, Ubuntu. With others, we are fellow human beings with obligations of mutual respect, reciprocal solidarity, and cooperation for the common good. And in our relationship with the world, we are world beings, deeply embedded in the natural as well as the social world, interrelated, interdependent, and unavoidably responsible for the health, wholeness, and well-being of our world. Thus, we understand that damage to the world is damage to us, and ecocide is a form of genocide, the end of all of us. And having said that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker. Kumi Naidoo is a South African-born human rights and climate activist. At 15, he organized school boycotts against the apartheid educational system in South Africa. His work made him a target for the security police, and he was forced into exile in the United Kingdom in 1990. Naidoo returned to South Africa and was asked to lead the process to formally register the African National Congress as a political party. Kumi then served as the official spokesperson for the Independent Electoral Commission, the overseer of the country's first democratic elections in April 1994. He has served as International Executive Director of Greenpeace International from 2009 to 2016 and Secretary General of Amnesty International from 2018 to 2020. Naidu has lectured at Fossil Free University and was Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy until early 2022. Naidu is a senior advisor for the Community Arts Network and a special advisor to the Green Economy Coalition. He is professor of practice at Thunderbird School of Global Management at Arizona State University and continues to serve as a global ambassador of Africans Rising for Justice, Peace, and Dignity. Naidu is visiting fellow at Oxford University and honorary fellow at Magdalen College. Let's give a warm University of Colorado Boulder to Kumi Naidu.
Thank you so much for that very, very kind introduction. I'm hoping that you are hearing me fine. First, let me apologize for not being there in present with you. I would have loved to have been there. But without any further ado, let me say that we're going to do something different at the beginning and something different at the end from most keynote presentations will normally do. The first is I'm going to get you all to answer a question. I'm going to give you 3 options and 3 statements, A, B, and C. And I'm going to ask you to stand if you agree with A, B, or C as statements. And at the end, I'm hoping that we could end up with all of you standing and dancing to a song from Africa. That's the plan. Let's see if it can work. So before any further ado, let me tell you what are the 3 statements. Statement A, everything is fine climate-wise. Climate is a challenge, but like other challenges like COVID and so on, we will be able to resolve it. Second, we have a massive challenge. The window of opportunity is small and closing, but it is within humanity's capability to turn things around. That's option B. Time is running out, but it's still within the realms of possibility. And option C is it's too late. We could have said that in much more graphic ways. You could say we screwed and even more graphic ways, but those are the 3 options. So what I want to do is quickly, in 1 minute, ask those that agree with statement A, if you can please stand. And I need the moderator to just give me a sense of what the breakdown roughly is at the end. Okay, I'm imagining that
No one is standing for option number 1.
Okay. Okay, clearly these people have all been at the climate conference. Option B. Option B. We have a massive challenge and the window of opportunity is closing, but we still can turn things around. Option B.
The majority of the room is standing.
Okay. Now, option C. Those who believe it's actually too late and the best that humanity can do now is be as kind to each other as we disappear as a species.
There are
Anybody
6
standing up for
people
option
standing.
C?
There are 7 people standing.
7 people.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Part of what I'm trying to do in this presentation by putting this choice to each of you is to say that part of what we need to do as we come out of the climate conference, the COP in Egypt, is to recognize that all of us now need to take on a mantle of leadership. That the notion of how we've understood leadership in the past as something that happens with a few people taking leadership has to change. And part of that leadership is posing difficult questions and trying to have deep conversations around it. So, of course, I'm sure the 8 brothers and sisters that stood up for option 3 would all prefer that we were at option B or even in option A. And I'm sure most of the people who stood up for option B would like to be in option A. But we are at a moment of history where we need to do what Amilcar Cabral, the leader of the West African Guinea-Bissau anti-colonial movement, said many decades ago, that we need to tell no lies and claim no easy victories. So I must start now by confessing that these days I'm much more anxious about speaking to any audience than I was as a young activist. And I just wanted to say a thank you for that very, very kind, generous introduction. But just to point out that I could have been introduced in a slightly different way. I could have been introduced as, this guy seems to be a reasonably nice guy. He's been around for more than 4 decades. He's been fighting the good fight, but actually has not that much to show in terms of advancement for economic justice, climate justice, social justice, gender justice, and so on. And that's the kind of brutal honesty that we need right now, given where things are. And why the best way to do it in an anecdote is to say that I was speaking to an audience in the US once, and at the end of the speech, somebody put up the hand and said, Dr. Naidu, have you heard of Martin Luther King? And I said, yes, of course. He inspired me and many people in my country in our struggle for liberation. And then she asked, do you know what his most famous speech was called? Thinking it was a trick question, I said it very tentatively. I said, I have a dream. And she shouted back to me, yes, it was I have a dream. But when I hear you speak, you have a bloody nightmare. Oceans are rising, forests are disappearing, inequality is rising, and so on. In this anecdote lies a very important challenge for leadership right now. How do we find the right balance between speaking truth to power, not sanitizing how deep the crisis is that we find ourselves in, but how do we also do it in a way that energizes, motivates, mobilizes, and so on, rather than sends a message to people, hey, things are really so bad and it's so late, so what's the point of resisting? So that is a key, because we can't lie to people. And that was the object of the first exercise. People can see what's happening, young people in particular. And let me just say, in my opinion right now, the only constituency of activism that generally understands the urgency of the moment that we find ourselves in, and that are showing the kind of urgency of purpose that is needed, is young people. That's not to say that there are not a number of older people who are showing the same level of concern. But let's be clear, many of the people in my generation are contaminated by bad experience, which we've dealt with for so long, that the capability to imagine different futures and so on is, quite frankly, quite restricted. Next slide, please. So we are living in one of the most consequential moments in world history, right? In 2015, I was in the Pacific and I learned a new slogan, 1.5 to stay alive, 1.5 to stay alive. And what that slogan was saying is already, as the diagram on the screen shows, we are facing a convergence of multiple crises, and we needed to act with greater agency and urgency. So 6 months later, I find my same new friends at the Paris climate negotiations. They invite me to join them, and I enthusiastically go, and I'm about to start 1.5 to stay alive, and they are shouting back, 1.5, we might survive. 1.5. In 6 months, the slogan moved from 1.5 to stay alive to 1.5, we might survive. And we must ask the uncomfortable question about why is it that so many powerful nations in the world and powerful leaders and powerful businesses are willing to simply write off large numbers of poor people in places like the Pacific, the Caribbean, coastal regions of places, of many cities in Asia, Africa, and so on. Why is it so easy? And I want to just say, quite frankly, we are not only dealing with the issue of climate injustice, we are also dealing with the issue of climate apartheid. So then, the next slide, please. So then, when we analyze why are we losing, right? Why are we losing? Then the uncomfortable question that we have to recognize is that One of the mistakes I think activism has made for far too long in very many different contexts has been that we have confused, we have assumed that the biggest challenge we face is what some have called the repressive state apparatus, army, police, use of formal laws, repression, and so on. And yes, this is a massive problem. But actually, I want to say that the bigger problem we face is not the repressive state apparatus, but it is the ideological state apparatus, by which you can name the framework for education, framework for religion, funding of arts and culture, and most importantly, the framework for communications and media. And when we look at this reality, and we look at the rise of fascism in the United States, in Europe, and so on, we have to recognize that one of the biggest problems we have is that those of us in the climate struggle are not communicating in a way that can reach the people that need to be reached the most, in a language that resonates with their cultural realities. We have to be able to get better at doing this, because failure to do this means that we cannot mobilize the level of public participation that is necessary to turn things around. So the next slide is a video. Sorry, the next one is leading to a video on rethinking frameworks of thinking. Okay, rethinking frameworks of thinking. So basically, I want you to listen with an open mind to the next video from Matt Damon, and you can guess whether it's his words, whether it's somebody else's words, when he was seeing it, and so on. But just keep an open mind and listen to it. Or play the video, please. Sorry, you have to go one. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Kumi, we don't have
understand. Good.
access to that video.
Okay, sorry. Then let me just quickly tell you what he said. I apologize for that. I don't know what went wrong. Sorry. So basically, Matt Damon here was speaking at an event to commemorate the renowned US labor historian Howard Zinn. And in it, he says three very important things I'll just focus into. One is he says that it was a topic on civil disobedience. And he said one of the biggest problems we have, historically speaking, and in the present, is not civil disobedience, but actually it's civil obedience. You know, it is what led to Nazism in Germany and every other injustice that we've seen, where people have obeyed unjust laws, gone to war, and so on. The second thing he says is that we have to be careful about how we understand the rule of law, right? Because he says the rule of law has become the darlings of the oppressors and the threat to the oppressed. Now, and that the rule of law regularize and institutionalize all the injustices that exist before the rule of law. Now, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that everything about the rule of law is bad. Rule of law has a very important place in society, but I think a slavish acceptance of the status quo is simply not what we need today. And we need to follow what Martin Luther King said when in 1965, and I quote, he said, "As I come to the end of my speech, I want to note that in the field of modern child psychology, there's a very dominant term called maladjusted. Now, all of us want to suffer from, don't want to suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. But my friends, I say to you, there are certain things in our world that are so unjust and immoral that good, decent people should refuse to be well adjusted to." Then he goes on to say, "I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry, racial discrimination, and so on." And on the economy, he says, "I never intended to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few, and millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society. So, especially to the young people in the audience, let me just summarize what Martin Luther King was saying. He was actually saying, and he said it himself actually in a speech a few months later. He said, I call upon decent men and women to come together to set up a new international movement to be known as the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment. Right? Now, obviously, this organization wasn't formed, but what he's saying is, we have all, academia included, NGOs included, have adjusted to injustices that we just never should have adjusted to, whether it's gender inequality, denying women the right to vote, and many, many things over history, such as slavery and so on. So how do we get out of it? So one of the things we've got to do is turbocharge intersectionality. And yeah, one of the weaknesses of the climate movement historically has been to frame the climate struggle as a environmental struggle. Unless we frame the climate struggle as a fundamentally human-centric struggle and try to make the connections between climate and food, climate and energy, etc., we will not be able to bring people into the struggle on a scale that we need to bring them into the struggle. Next quote, next slide, please. So as we move forward at this moment after the challenges that came out of COP27, where we again had a few nice words and not substantive movement, and even if all of the words were perfect and all of us sitting in this conference said, oh wow, COP27 gave us such a great outcome document, we know that what gets said in those COPs and what they sign on to, just a proportion actually often gets implemented in reality, so there is no room for complacency. But Albert Einstein also challenged us when he said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get different results. And this, in all honesty, I can put up my hand and say that I meet that definition of insanity. I invite each and every one of you, especially people like me who've been around for a long time. This is a time for us to even, just because we did things for 20, 30, 40 years in a particular way, if it hasn't delivered results, it hasn't delivered results. And we've got to have the courage to say, let's innovate, let's try different things. We have to imagine that the world we live in cannot be the best that humanity creates like what we got now. We have to imagine that it could be much, much better. Next slide, please. So people might think that the worst disease facing humanity is COVID or influenza, but many are saying that the current economic system has given us the worst global disease you can imagine in the form of affluenza. Affluenza, if you want, is a pathological illness where people have been led to believe that a good, meaningful, decent life comes from more and more and more material consumption. And let's be clear, much as many people want to deny it, the climate crisis, the climate challenge, the climate problem is an economic problem, right? It is a failure of the unjust economic system that has driven people at the top to excessive consumption and people at the bottom with less and less. I was very pleased that we honored indigenous peoples from Colorado in opening this meeting. As a young exile in Oxford, I had a poster on my wall which said, only when the last tree is cut, the last fish has been eaten, the last river has been polluted, will humanity realize that we cannot eat money. This was a wisdom from the Cree people of North America. And here I want to say that if all of us in this conference were the last people left on Earth, climate change happens, we're the ones survived it, and some young people amongst us says, you know what, let's just write what happened and put it in a capsule so that if human life emerges again, then maybe they won't make the same mistakes. I believe very strongly one of the things we would say and put in that capsule is that those that were historically deemed by some to be uncivilized were actually the most civilized of human beings on this planet, and perhaps the converse applies the other way around. So next slide, please. Rising to meet the communications deficit. So we need to recognize that in this moment of history, that pessimism and cognitive dissonance, denying reality, are luxuries that we simply cannot afford. The good news is, while things are actually bad in terms of day-to-day developments, right? And some of the statistics on climate and all are getting worse and worse. The rate of melting of glaciers in Antarctica, Arctic, and so on. But one thing that I should tell you, that I don't remember any moment in more than 40 years of activism where there was such an appetite for substantial structural and systemic change, not simply rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic while humanity sinks, which will not cut it anymore. Anybody who thinks that an economic system that guarantees a level of inequality like what we have can be maintained on the one hand and deliver a climate solution is, I'm afraid, not being honest with themselves. So activists for far too long also have been spending too much of time talking to each other rather than speaking to the people that actually require our support and leadership and so on. Next slide, please. So when we think about how do we move forward, one of the things that I think we have to recognize that and yeah, it might sound harsh for some people to hear this, Steve Bannon and the right-wing Republican movement have understood the power and importance of culture much more than progressives do and much more than the climate movement does as a whole, right? I know this is hard to hear, but we have to be able to look at the fact that Bannon and his ilk, they said, forget facts and forget the head, and let's shoot to the heart. A lot of our activism has been about, let's win this by facts and figures, 1.5 degrees, 350 parts per million, blah, blah, blah. All of this goes completely over the top, over the heads of 99% of people on the planet, right? We have to recognize that what is necessary right now is not to do what the Bannons of the world do, which is wipe out facts, maintain facts, stick to the truth, but appeal to people in their cultural idioms, in a language that they understand, in things that resonate to them. Let's stop talking about the climate struggle as if not all the people in the world are directly impacted. And I'll just give you a small example. The year 2011, I'm on a small inflatable boat heading to occupy a oil rig in Greenland. And while that's happening, I look at this poster that says Stop Arctic Destruction. And it's 2011. At that time, nobody was talking about the Arctic. And suddenly I had this horrible thought that if I died in that action, that because my colleagues was very nervous because I don't swim very well. And they were saying, no, don't worry, Kumi, you fall in the water, we'll pull you out with the suit that you're wearing, you'll survive at least 2 hours. And when I looked at the size of the waves, I thought, wow, if I didn't make it out of this banner that I'm carrying, 99.9% of comrades, friends, family back home in Africa wouldn't know what I was trying to say. And to cut a long story short, when I eventually get home, a child in my family says, Uncle Kumi, that was a horrible slogan, Stop Arctic Destruction. Nobody understood it. What would have been a better slogan, she suggested, was Save Santa Claus Now. Save Santa Claus Now. Now, I'm hoping you're laughing at it, but think about the brilliance of it. What the child is saying and what the young generation is saying. You've got to talk to us in a language that sees us as full human beings, as spiritual beings, that we can bring arts, culture, and activism together in a form of artivism that actually can move the agenda forward. And I am putting a lot of energy right now into saying, let's bring the arts and culture community into the climate struggle to help us to communicate on a scale that is critically necessary for us to do right now. Next slide, please. Now, one of the weaknesses of traditional activism has been the objective reality that we start from a point of how people are oppressed, marginalized, excluded, repressed, and so on. And sometimes, unwittingly, in the process, we reach a conclusion that because of slavery, colonialism, and all the other economic injustices and stuff that people have had to endure in many parts of the world, that people, as a result, at the end of it, have no agency, right? I want to say to you, we have to break that. We have to remind ourselves that notwithstanding all that has gone on, what people have been on the receiving end of has not left people without agency. People, as we see day in, day out across the world, people still have a lot of agency. In the interest of time, I'll just summarize. This was my effort at saying, well, you got to read each of those outer little things from the inside. Remind ourselves, people have power as litigators, as volunteers, as voters, as, so on, in terms of the harnessing our autonomy quadrant. If we look at harnessing our creative participation, I've said something about how we do that, but also we have to look at ancient wisdom, indigenous cultures, and so on, as sources that can be leveraged to get out of the mess of thinking and action that we find ourselves in. I want to just say something about the three quadrants, the two quadrants on the right, and that is harnessing wealth and harnessing consumption. Now, so people have power as holders of bank accounts. You might think, okay, but if everybody has little money, what good does that do? In 2015, in Australia, the climate movement mobilized and went after all the banks in Australia to say, you will not lend to the largest coal mine in Australia's history. And they succeeded in getting every single bank not to do that because they were ordinary people, whether they had $5 or 5 million Australian dollars, were standing outside banks and keeping the pressure. So we need to get smarter at leveraging aggregated wealth, as we've seen in the Divest Invest campaign and so on, because I strongly believe one of the few ways of accelerated progress on climate change is by following the money. And in the context of following the money, we also have to harness people's consumption power. And we have seen consumer boycotts and so on around the world in struggles for justice over time that actually tell us that this is possible. Now, I just wanted to end at this point with a story of encouragement, right? This is not an easy time. This is not a time that we can say to ourselves, we are pretty sure things are going to get better. In fact, sadly, it is more sensible to say the opposite. But in a context like this, each of us now have to become storytellers for a new vision, a new future, a new reality. We have to have the courage, on the one hand, to dream big, right? To try to imagine the world that we need to create, but be realistic about starting from the present and figure out how do we move from the major different kinds of challenges that we face in terms of changing our food system, our energy system, our transport system, and more, right? And in that context, I just want to end by saying that our well-being is going to be challenged. And I want to make an appeal in concluding comments here, that one of the principles of activism moving forward must also be ensuring that those of us who are pushing for the big structural and systemic changes that are needed, not to save the planet. Let me just be clear. If this point has not been made, I'm sure it's been made. The planet does not need saving, because at the rate we are going, we will be gone, the planet will still be here. And good news for everybody who's worried about saving the planet is once we become extinct, the forests will recover, the oceans will grow back, and so on. The oceans will replenish and so on. So we have to constantly remind ourselves that the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is nothing more and nothing less than protecting our children and their children's futures. And therefore, I just would end with this message that we have to tell ourselves every day, the struggle for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. Those of us that have the chance to contribute, have had the knowledge, now is the time for us to deploy that knowledge and to broaden the participation of people in the climate struggle on a scale never before seen, and also to do it in a way that builds community, celebrates human solidarity, and ultimately, as I said to Greta Thunberg and Fridays for the Future, when Amnesty gave them the Ambassador of Conscience Award, make sure you also have fun, sing, dance, and laugh in one of the biggest struggles that humanity will ever face. Thank you very, very much, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naidu. Please welcome back to the stage Dr. Rayland Rabaka to begin Q&A. We'll take questions from the audience. You'll see 3 people moving through the audience with microphones. If you would like to ask a question, please move to an aisle, raise your hand, and someone will bring a mic to answer you.
Okay. I'm Brandon. I'm a student here at the University of Colorado. Thanks for speaking with us today. My question kind of involves the human rights aspect regarding climate change. And I was wondering if you have ideas for solutions to those individuals whose human rights have been violated due to environmental neglect, such as those in Jackson, Mississippi, here in the United States, and maybe what actions we can take to institute restitution and rehabilitation of these water facilities in Jackson and other areas that are facing similar issues.
Thank you very much. Firstly, we have to be saying that climate change is a poverty issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a gender issue, and so on, as a general thing, right? We have to make it human-centered. I want to just quote you the words of Sharon Burrows, the president of the International Trade Union Federation, the first woman to lead the global trade union movement, when she says, and the trade union movement says, we have to support climate change because there are no jobs on a dead planet. There are no jobs on a dead planet. If there are no jobs on a dead planet, there are no people on a dead planet, and there are no human beings on a dead planet. So therefore, we need to have a very stronger human rights-centric way of addressing climate. And the last thing I would say is there's a book coming out in the next couple of weeks called The Revolution Will Not Be Litigated. So all I would say is that we need to use litigation. These are by some human rights lawyers which are saying that, yes, we need to use the law as we are doing, but we cannot think that law on its own will deliver the kinds of changes that we need. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
All right, we have our next question here.
I'm Monty Tarbox from Washington, D.C. Kumi, you're in a unique position to share with us what lessons from the apartheid struggle of 30 years ago most directly apply to the struggle we have today.
I think that the biggest lesson that I want to pull out is the importance to make sure that your movements are decentralized, as participatory as possible, that you really, really celebrate and respect the idea of collective shared leadership, and that we must break the idea that there are some leaders sitting in the world today who have all the answers to the challenges that we face. Nobody does. Nobody does. What we need to do is to embrace what we can call a culture of emergence. That is leadership which is saying honestly to people, yes, we know we have to reduce inequality. Yes, we know we need to reduce emissions. But exactly how we do it, let's co-create with this much participation and stakeholdership of people who are directly impacted and so on. And that's the kind of change that we need right now. And that, for me, sadly was a lessons from the anti-apartheid struggle, where we tried to build movements like that. But in the end, one of the reasons we're failing so drastically in South Africa is because we put too much of effort in individualized leadership, and often that individualized leadership is opportunistic male part of the population.
Thank you for that. And looks like we have another question here. Yes.
Hey, Kumi, it's Kristen Casper, your former lawyer, and at Greenpeace International General Counsel. I think we agree that the revolution is not going to be won through litigation, but that lawyers have played an incredible role in social change movements. So as a lawyer that is working to get communities to be leading their own cases and their own struggles, what should we be doing as lawyers to make sure that we win in the end?
So let me just pay tribute to Kristen, who was one of like 3 colleagues I found when I joined the Greenpeace in the legal department, and it's been great to see that today there's literally more than 400 or so court cases that are climate related, from the United States to all around the world, and therefore right now we have to look at how those court cases are being prosecuted. Now, basically, I am an advocate of using the full extent of the law, not because we will necessarily win those cases, but because many of these cases will open up space for other for other activism, and ultimately will win. Because if you look at tobacco litigation, for example, the first cases and so on were dismissed and laughed out, and eventually people built muscle, and eventually we saw the success. So yes, the only thing I'll conclude by saying is, if you have a legal intervention, you have to make sure that the people directly impacted by that legal intervention are behind you, lock, stock, and barrel. Because at the end of the day, let's be blunt about it. Decisions in courts are not made solely based on the letter of the law. It's made by a whole range of political considerations. And sadly, the United States today is one of the worst examples of that to the rest of the world. Thank you.
All right. You're receiving applause here. We have over here another question.
My name is David Holbrook, and I was struck by what you talked about with Greenpeace, your direct action with the banner. There's so much of that going on with Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement, what we've seen at the museums recently. What effect do you think these direct actions have on the overall issue?
I think overall, these direct actions are critically necessary. If history teaches us anything, when humanity has faced a terrible injustice or a big struggle, those struggles only move forward when decent men and women said enough is enough and no more. We're prepared to go to prison if necessary. We're prepared to put our lives on the line if necessary. Unfortunately, in the current moment where we find ourselves in, civil disobedience is as critical, if not more critical, than ever before. However, civil disobedience, like any other tool of struggle, right? You have to use it strategically. You have to deploy it in thoughtful ways. So, for example, let me just take one thing that's clear. If you have a persistent pattern of civil disobedience being executed by middle-class people, right, which impact working-class people, especially working-class people of color, who we need to win over because their transport, for example, is taken away from them, and that's not taken into account of the planning of the resistance, then that is middle-class arrogance that needs to be addressed, right? So part of what I'm saying is civil disobedience is a totally legitimate tool of struggle. It needs to be announced on a much larger scale, but we have to do it with the benefit that not simply we get a couple of articles in the newspaper and the story is known, around the world for a couple of days, but we are also building alliances. We're building networks. And so, for example, when I was at Greenpeace, I remember we were having a struggle in Chicago with the Pilsen coal mine there some years ago. And I remember in conversations what we said, what we need to do is not to only have the activists up on the coal stacks. We need 1,000 people on the ground saying, those folks, they might be looking crazy to some of you, but actually we stand with them. Unless we're able to show that kind of connection between action and people, then our politicians and business leaders will continue to ignore us as they've done over the last decades.
All right. Wonderful. We have another question here.
Hello, my name is Rio. I'm also a student at CU Boulder here. You touched on the fact that climate change can be seen almost as an economic problem as well. And my thought, especially in like a Western capitalist society, is if we're going to view it as an economic problem, we have to make climate change appeal to the people who are actually key figures in our economy, which are obviously going to be the wealthy. Now, in your solutions, there weren't too many aspects which touched on people who were, say, wealthy. Unfortunately, I see a lot of climate change solutions or things to be made sacrifices for those people, right? They're going to have to lose money. They're going to have to lose what they've built. And that's also why I think we've seen such small progress in our few years. So what would you say are the solutions in which we can actually appeal to the economic side and key figures in that aspect, if that's more, economically incentivizing climate solutions, if that makes sense? Yeah, thank you.
Beg your pardon, can you still hear me?
Yes.
If I caught that last question, is that the economic, saying that the economic system is the most major contributor to the climate crisis we find ourselves in, needs to also take into account the complexity of our
Thanks, everyone. We're trying to get Kumi back.
Okay.
Everyone, we see that Kumi has disconnected, and we're just waiting for him to reconnect. Thanks for your patience. And feel free to talk amongst yourselves.
I guess I was too late getting back, right?
We're glad to have you back.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess we're out of time, right? I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties.
No, we still have a little bit more time. We have more time.
Oh, okay.
Yes, about 7 minutes.
Is there a further question? Is there a further question?
Yes, we have another question coming.
Just your name, your affiliation, and get right to the question.
Kumi, do you need the question that was previously asked reiterated?
Oh, yes. This is good. I feel like I'm in class. We're going to restate the question for you, okay?
Thank you.
Essentially, what are your solutions for having economically more incentivizing things for bigger corporations or the wealthy in a Western society?
Okay, I mean, one would hope that the fact that wealthy, powerful people in societies are parents and grandparents, that would be enough motivation that they would make the changes that is called for. Because let me just say to business and political leaders around the world right now, that give it maximum 10 years. Your children and your grandchildren are going to look at you and ask you, Why did you not act when the science was saying my future was at stake? And let's make sure you have good answers to the question. But here's the difficulty. We have to build alternative examples of different ways of building the economy. And we have to look at addressing the question of the high income gaps that we have, which is completely unsustainable and so on. But what we have to do is show business leaders that if they don't change, they are risking everything, right? Just quick example. I was once in a meeting as head of Greenpeace with the head of a big fishing company. And I basically said to him and his sustainability team, I said, listen, I put to you, we are more committed as Greenpeace to your sustainability than y'all are. The way y'all are carrying on, y'all will completely destroy fish stocks. And then a key line of your business is gone. We are not saying we're not against fishing. We are saying we are against unsustainable fishing. So we have to find the kind of economic arguments, of which there are many, right, to get people to have the courage to reimagine a different economy. Let me just conclude by saying the reason why it is so difficult is those that benefit from the current system of fossil fuel addiction and dependency are the ones that largely control our governments in many parts of the world, and they are trying to resist change for as long as possible. Sorry I took too long.
Oh, no, thank you. That was perfect. It's perfect. Round of applause for you, Kumi. And we have another question.
I think and just save a few minutes at the end to play the video so that maybe people might dance.
That's right. We're definitely doing that. Wonderful. We got that. One more question. Oh, here we got another question.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Woolner. I'm a graduate student here at CU Boulder. My question is largely about trust. Obviously, trust is really important in terms of networking and communication, but trust building does take time, which we don't always have under this climate crisis. So how do we deal with that paradox?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this question. There's a very beautiful Dutch proverb that says, trust comes by feet, but leaves on a horse, right? It takes very long to build it, very quick to lose it, right? And right now, one of the key things we are missing is the absence of trust from community level right up to the political level. And right now, I think what is needed is a different kind of narratives, even in activism, right? So let's say you want to change the economic system, right? And that's clear. We need big changes in the economic system. Almost no serious person doesn't agree with that, right? But let's say all of us in this conference decide, hey, tomorrow let's launch a campaign. And some of us could argue, hey, let's build a campaign. Let's make it radical. We call it, let's smash the capitalist system, right? If we call it that, the day before we launch the campaign, let's say we are here, and those that disagree with us on this, the day we launch the campaign, we've pushed people further away because many people might not generally have any meaningful stake in a capitalist system, but they have been led to believe, right? And they're going to defend. But if we framed it as, let's build an economy that includes everybody and does not destroy the environment, it might not sound so sexy as smash the capitalist system, but it's the kind of rethinking. We need to come up with narratives that builds bridges to those that are not with us. And let me end with this. Activism cannot continue to be simply the art of developing a position and mobilizing the people that largely agree with you already, and then dissing those that disagree. Activism in this day and age has to be about having the humility to build bridges of those that disagree with us, to help them to walk across to where we are. And this means, my dear friends, also learning to love the people that voted for Donald Trump, learning to love the people that voted for Brexit and so on. Those that disagree with us, we have to work out a way to win them over. Sorry. Thank you.
No, wonderful.
Thank you.
Round of
This time
applause. We have time for one more question, do we? All right, we got one more question. Come on, Boulder. One more question. We got one in the front here.
Thank you. Hi, Kumi. It's wonderful to meet you. I'm actually Maya woman from southern Belize, and everything you said resonates. Certainly, I think not so much a question, but a comment. And just to add, we've been in litigation for the last 30 years over our ancestral land rights as Indigenous peoples. And you're correct to say that the struggle will not be won in the courts. It will be won in the people. And I think that governments respond to two things. They respond to votes and they respond to money. And as you've clearly articulated, we have to follow the money. And influence is really critical in this situation. But the votes are also important, and we need to understand our power as people to influence who are the leaders that we are putting in place that are holding our future at bay. And I think that is resounding with me, and so I want to congratulate you for that. So I don't have a question for you, but I join in solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that.
Fully agree.
Please, go ahead.
No, I fully agree that the moment we are in right now requires a different kind of imagining, right? But the kind of, because, I would say the biggest challenge we have right now is the absence of imagination, right? That we cannot, all of us think about what could be different. And this might sound like a silly point to make, if I might bring an African example, right? So a couple of years ago, it was the 50th anniversary of the Organization of African Unity, and I happened to be attending, and last minute I was asked to say a few words, and I wasn't prepared, and I thought, what am I going to do? So I ended up telling a story, and the story went something like this, about being a visiting scholar at Uppsala University in Sweden, discovering that they run the buses on human feces, in some cultures called crap, shit and other things, but basically human feces. I didn't know it was possible, and I discovered that this is possible, and then I find out a few years later, months later, when I joined Greenpeace, that this is happening in Bristol in England, where they have a bus called the Poo Bus that runs on reprocessed human feces. And then I look at Africa, and we got a problem with the disposal of human waste. And I say to the leaders of the African Union, I refuse to accept that European shit is superior than African shit.
Come on.
We have to get our shit. We have to get our shit together and turn the crisis of climate change into an opportunity, and look at how we come up with strategies that give us double wins. We got to take our shit out of our rivers who are destroying our water, for example. And if that same shit can give us energy, why would we not do it? And that's what we need to do globally. We need to be looking at solutions that give us double and triple and quadruple wins, not just one action for one result. Thank you. I hope I wasn't too crude.
Wow. What a way to close out. Kumi Naidoo. Kumi Naidoo.